All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. So thanks you all for hopping on. For most of the class today, we'll be reviewing the new forms again. And just in an effort to just drive the points home about what's changed and what the new processes are, I figured this won't be the last time we review them, but with each passing day and week, we all get a little bit more comfortable, a little bit smarter about the form. So I don't think it hurts to keep reviewing them. So, but before we do that, we have Steve Donchis on with Atomic Home Inspections, also an agent with White Rock Realty, and he has some wisdom to impart to us today. So, Steve, take her away. You'll have to unmute, and if you want to share your screen, you can do that too. Whatever you want.
All right. I'm not that proficient at it, so I don't know how to share my screen. So what I will do, I think we got an attachment that was sent out earlier today. So if you guys can see that in the email, I have a little presentation that I wrote up. So I'm just going to kind of go through that, and you can follow along with that checklist if you like. So we'll kind of go over in order, and then after I'm done with that, and if you guys have any questions, we can have a conversation. So won't dominate too much time because I know there's a lot of information that Brad needs to cover today. So with that being said, again, I'm Steve, Atomic Home Inspections. I want to help add value to you and your new listing. We all know that home inspections are critical for home buyers. Most home buyers who are interested in selling their properties do not want a pre-listing inspection. In fact, pre-listing inspection is the rarest form of home inspection that is requested in today's market. This is understandable because if a homeowner has a pre-listing inspection done, then the issues found by the licensed home inspector are required to be disclosed to the prospective buyer if not corrected, and it is an added expense to the seller. I know that one of your highest priorities as a listing agent is to sell your client's home for as much as possible and to protect your client from hidden costs and expenses. We also know that the buyer's agent's goals are the exact opposite of yours, and they rely on their buyer's inspection report to point out as many flaws as possible so they can be used to negotiate your client's home's price as well as your commission down as much as possible. So when you do the initial walkthrough of your client's property prior to listing the home, you can use the checklist I provided as you walk with your client to identify some opportunities that can be addressed prior to listing the home that can help minimize negotiations and keep more money in your client's pocket. So most important is when you walk into the house for the first time, do you smell natural gas? If you do, leave the home immediately and call the gas company. That's first and foremost. Next, the big three, otherwise known as roof, foundation, and structure. These are the major components of a home, which buyers are usually most concerned with. The roof. I don't expect that you're going to climb on your client's roof. Although quick visual observations from the ground can be very insightful, you'll probably not be able to see hail damage or roof covering delamination. So look for missing shingles or any areas of discoloration. Are there any trees making contact with the roof covering? If you see something that just does not look right, you may want to recommend a free roof inspection from a roofing contractor. For the foundation, does it feel like you are walking uphill or downhill while inside of your client's home? Ghost doors which open and close on their own? Obvious large cracks in walls or ceilings. Remember that hairline cracks inside of a home are usually settlement cracks and do not necessarily indicate that there are foundation issues. Structure is a little harder to identify possible opportunities. Mainly look when you're outside the home. Look for any separation in siding or apparent cracks in a brick. Once again, a lot of times these cracks are settlement cracks and do not always mean there is a foundation or a structural issue. Electrical and plumbing are two items that are just as important as the big three we just covered. Electrical and plumbing have a direct impact on safety as well. So electrical is a little trickier to spot from a distance. A few things to look for are there GFCI outlets in the kitchen, bathrooms, garages, and outdoors. You look out there. GFCI building codes have sporadically updated different areas of the home at different times, beginning in 1971, with the last revision being 2023. So there will be varying levels of updated GFCI systems in each home. Arc fault circuit breakers are only visible in the panel box, so verification of their existence is more difficult and dangerous to explore. So I do not recommend that you personally verify their presence in the panel box. Though a good rule of thumb to remember, arc fault circuit interrupters went into the NEC code in 1999, and like GFCI protection has evolved over the last 25 years to include more locations in the home. It is a safe bet if the home was built prior to 2008, there is probably little or no arc fault protection unless the electrical system has been updated since then. This can be an expensive update to perform since the average arc fault breaker costs between $50 to $150 each, and multiple breakers will be required. Or in older homes, the entire panel box may require replacement to accommodate them. So you may want to inform your client as to the potential expense of updating their electrical panel, as some buyers will likely prefer that update to happen prior to closing. Other things to look for while walking the home with your client are missing or broken outlet cover plates or light switch cover plates, which are cheap and easy to replace, or any lights not working, which in most cases is just a burnt out light bulb, and you can encourage your client to replace that before listing. For plumbing, all that you really can see is what's visible, primarily the fixtures. Are there any broken fixtures, missing handles or sink stoppers, any faucets or shower heads leaking or dripping water during your walkthrough? Toilet running nonstop, water leaking from the base of the toilet, exterior hose bibs leaking, slow drains, anything like that. Moving on to appliances, while walking your client's kitchen, just verify that the cooktop, oven, microwave, dishwasher, and the vent hood are not in disrepair. Missing knobs or switches can usually be replaced and are rather inexpensive. Amazon is a good place to go for that. While walking home with your client, look for a couple of air conditioning supply vents. If you see noticeable dirt around the vents, the filters may be dirty and may need to be changed. Broken seals and windows are pretty easy to spot, as the windows will be cloudy, and every openable window really should have a screen. And just finally, just please ensure that the client is aware that the electrical panel box, the attic access opening, and a water heater location should be completely accessible for when the buyer's home inspector is scheduled for the inspection. So that's really kind of all I kind of went over the checklist as we went through. So just going to check and see if anybody has any questions about anything, or just really anything at all. We can discuss anything like arc fault breakers or really anything. So if you have anything, please feel free to ask.
Steve, is there a rule of thumb in terms of the age of a home that you would strongly recommend an agent saying, yeah, you probably need to get a pre-listing inspection? Because I mean, if it was built within the past 5 or 6 years, you could argue that you don't need to do one, but older than that, I mean, what is your experience?
Well, so really age, it really depends on how well it's updated. So I mean, I've been in homes that were built in the 50s that were as good as any home built today. I mean, up to code, they did their panel box, they have everything up to code, and everything's been updated. And I've been in homes that were built 15 years ago that were completely neglected since they moved in. So
Yeah,
it really doesn't matter. I would just say for sure it really depends on the looks of the home. If it looks like it's been updated and updated well, then if you're probably okay. But if it looks like you got some issues, like on this checklist, if you see a few things that are happening, you could definitely request to have a pre-listing inspection. I mean, we know an inspection is going to happen anyway. So whether it happened before, it's definitely going to happen with the buyer. So it could save that expense. But I mean, if the home has some issues, you may want to go ahead and have somebody get in there and take a look at it, because we look deep into the electrical panel box for sure. We look at anywhere we can look that's not behind a wall, essentially. And so it's beneficial to have one, and at least you can kind of get ahead of it if there are some issues that need to be addressed. So that way, again, you can not have it pop up on you at the end of the negotiating period there.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any questions for Steve? Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Steve.
Steve's
Thank you. Appreciate
information
it,
is
guys.
on our website. If you need an inspector in the DFW area, at least, he's a good one. So, all right. So let's go into the contracts today. So before I get into that, funny story, I actually had to order a yard sign last week. And that was because my neighbor came to me and said, hey, I want you to list my home. And I kind of gave him a weird look, and he says, well, what's that for? What's the problem? And I said, well, I don't mean to, tell you something you may not already know, but everyone in the neighborhood thinks your house is haunted. And he says, what? He says, I don't know about that. I've lived here for 365 years and nothing's ever happened since I've lived here. So, all right, I'm here all week. Don't forget to tip your server. So, so I figured I'd start out with something light because, contracts are always fun. So, if you're like me, when someone springs a new set of processes on you, it takes a minute to really have it sink in. And I think with each passing week, and with more exposure to these things, that happens. And so, arguably, the last time I went through this, and it wasn't that long ago, I later discovered there were some errors. They've changed the form since then, believe it or not. And so, this won't be the last time we go over these, but there's a really good hour and 47-minute training video on this from the board in DFW MetroTex that I have watched twice, believe it or not, to prepare for this meeting. And I'll send it out when I send out the follow-up for all this. But simply put, what I've done is a better job this time of organizing all the contracts, and we'll go over those that are just for sellers, those that are just for buyers. And I captured all of your questions from last time and actually have answers to those this time, along with a couple of other ones that came up from that training session. So questions come up today. If there are any, and I can't answer them, I will capture them today and get answers and get them back to you. So what is the settlement about? So basically what we're going to have to do is, number one, eliminate and prohibit any requirement of offers of compensation in the MLS or anywhere else, right? So we can't make a sale contingent upon someone paying us something, okay? The next one is similar in that we also cannot list any of that in the MLS, all right? And so number three, we have to require the MLS to eliminate all broker compensation fields and compensation information on the MLS. There was or has been talk about adding a field in the MLS that speaks to buyer concessions. It has been kind of thought that that's probably not going to happen because you could make a pretty strong argument that that's a way to circumvent on the MLS the original settlement. So I wouldn't look to have that in the MLS. Now that can be communicated elsewhere, which I'll get to. But I'm going to get to the dates of when all this happens in a moment. But number 5 and 6 are a big one. Prohibit the use of MLS data or data feeds to directly or indirectly establish or maintain a platform of offers of compensation from multiple brokers or other buyer representatives. Number 5, reinforce that MLS participants and subscribers must not, and MLSs must not, enable the ability to filter out or restrict MLS listings based on the amount of compensation. So let me just say this about number 5. What number 5 means is that if you think that you can put a document, and this came up last time, a document or some kind of communication in the document section of the MLS about compensation, you can't do that. And as a matter of fact, don't try it because they are going to remove you from the MLS, and you don't want that to happen. The other thing is that you can't list this in Broker Bay. And I know that maybe currently I heard that they exist on Zillow. That will all go away. Anything that directly or indirectly syncs up with the MLS, there is no offer of compensation displayed. Okay, so far it kind of sounds like gloom and doom. How are we going to communicate this? I'm going to get to that in a moment. Number 5, we are going to require compensation disclosures. Sorry, let me just move this. Require compensation disclosures to sellers and prospective sellers and buyers. So we're going to go over those documents. All that means is that we have to make 100% transparent to the principals in the transaction, to the buyer and seller, who gets paid and what. And then lastly, to require anybody that is an MLS participant, so that's you and me, working with a buyer, to enter into a written agreement with the buyer prior to touring the property. So all this means is that there needs to be a buyer's representation agreement signed before any showing of any property can take place. And there are 2 versions of that. We'll go over that in a second. Okay, so all the new forms are in zip forms now. Your templates, if you created templates for listing agreements and all these various forms that you need, they should have auto-populated and changed for you. They did for me. Now, whenever I bring this subject up, I'll get a couple of people that always say, well, mine didn't update. And so I'm not saying it's a guarantee. All I can tell you is that when I went in there this week, my old ones and my templates were gone and replaced with the clean new versions. They're dated June 24, and they should be in there. If they're not, the new forms exist in all the libraries. So go, and they're only TXR forms. So make sure that you're replacing those appropriately. And just FYI, these are referred to as forms and not contracts because TREC is the only entity that does a contract. Texas Realtors does forms. July 29th, okay, it's fast approaching. The BAC field goes away in the MLS. BAC stands for Buyer's Agent Commission. That will go away in the MLS. August 17th is enforcement time. All right, that is when all of these things go into practice for real. And my guess is there will be people testing this out there to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But August 17th is when everything has to be enforced. So here's the deal. For all the new clients, like literally today and forward, they won't have ever seen the old contracts. So there's really no need to go down the road of, well, this is the way it was, now this is the way it is. Whatever's in front of them we'll just have to explain what they need to know, and that's it. Only we know kind of the dysfunction leading up to this point. But don't overshare, don't over-explain. The people that you're dealing with today, brand new, won't have any exposure to what the old contracts were. And so when we're dealing with sellers, so if you're on your listing appointment, my sense is that 9 out of 10 sellers are going to continue to provide compensation for the buyer's agent. But if you sense that they are hedging or they're on the fence, or maybe they know just enough about this case to be dangerous, and they want to go down that road of not paying a buyer's agent's commission, I would just say, okay, let's take a look at what will create an environment where your home won't sell. Price, condition. All I do is put a sign in the yard and don't market it. You don't pay the buyer's agent's commission. You don't stage it. You don't clean it. I mean, all those things. This is just one more thing that you can add to the likelihood that it is going to sell. And in most markets in Texas, we're in a pretty balanced market. So these things ain't flying off the shelf. So a seller needs to know from us professionally what are the handful of things that I need to do to make sure this home sells in the time that I want it to sell? And that's one of them. Okay. All the paperwork has to match the closing disclosure. Before, the MLS was kind of the single source of truth. We could kind of point to that listing and say, this is what it said in terms of how it was going to get paid. There are a couple of additional steps and pieces of paper we now have to integrate into our process. And I'm going to review that. All right, so I will be redoing all the samples and the videos. I just want to make sure that I'm doing them based on the most current version. I have done two things though. In Back Agent, I have added the 2 mandatory forms as recommended today. Now, after that date in August, they'll change to required. And they are the addendum regarding brokers' fees, and that's TXR 2406, and compensation agreement between brokers, and that's TXR 2402. So right now you'll see that as a recommended field only if you represent the buyer. Okay, sellers, there are no, really new forms. There's just changes to existing forms. The second thing I did is, if you have not created your templates, whether you're brand new or you're not brand new, there is no more valuable thing you can do to save time and angst from wondering what you need, what contracts you need for what transaction. So what I've done is, if you go to our website, whiterocktexas.net, and go to the how-to video tab, one of the very first ones at the top is setting up your zip form templates. And there's a video there that shows you how to do it, but then there's a document of all the contracts, and they are all updated, okay, as of today. So that is a clean list, buyers, sellers, leases, it's all good to go. If you represent a piece of land or a commercial property, all of this you're exempt, okay? So if it's unimproved property or a commercial piece of real estate, what I'm about to go over today doesn't apply. Don't forget that under the buyer, sellers, leases tab is an exhaustive list of why people should pay what we ask them to pay. So it is our buyer value proposition. So if you want a good place to start on this journey, go to the buyer, sellers, leases tab and print that piece of paper off, because it will give you confidence in articulating what your value is. All right, so I've already mentioned that. All right, so FAQs. Can I upload compensation related forms into my listing into the MLS? No. So the settlement says that nothing about offers of compensation can be anywhere on the MLS. Can I list compensation in a showing services website? No, because it's too closely tied to the MLS. How will I know what the buyer's agent's commission is? So this came up last time, and quite frankly, I didn't have a good answer. So Christy articulated pretty well what really the answer is last time, which is, when you think about the process that you engage in as a buyer's agent in acquiring the client, and now it's time to go see a home, think about what you do when they say, I want to go see 123 Main Street. You typically reach out to the other agent via text, phone, or email and ask them, are you working any other offers? You may do that before or after you set the appointment, but you're going to need to add that step of asking the listing agent, what commission are you offering? And I would phrase it just like that. And we're going to go over the listing agreement, where it says that once, Mr. Seller, you sign this listing agreement, you give me, the listing agent, permission to tell people that. Okay, so you have to ask. And so however you do that is up to you. Will there be times that you have to go see the home and you won't have gotten a response? Absolutely. But you will have needed to have that conversation with the buyer that is like, look, I don't know if they're going to offer compensation or not. Do you want to go see homes where I know for sure? Or do you want to go see homes where I'm waiting on an answer and we figure that out later? It's totally up to the buyer. But just be forewarned, there will be instances where you're not going to get that answer before you need to go see the home. But that is the process. That's how you know. Now, at that point, it's only verbal, right? So hopefully the agent is articulating exactly what was signed in the listing agreement. And then you memorialize that in documents that I'm going to review in a second. But step one is get a verbal of what you're getting paid, if anything. Okay. What if a buyer can't afford to pay my commission? Well, as I said before, they will need to get with their lender to see if there is a creative way to work the commission payment into the loan or the sales price. They may opt to not see that home. And that'll probably be most people, which goes back to my original point, which is most sellers, I'm guessing, are going to just pay the commission. But if you have that conversation and they're just beside themselves with the prospect of having to pay your commission, just tell them, look, there are ways to get around this. We can work this into the loan or the price, or ask for a seller concession in paragraph 12, or things can be changed. And I'm going to get into that in a second. What if a builder is offering a bonus? Can I accept it? Absolutely. So remember that the buyer's representation agreement has to be definitive in what your fee is. So if you put 3% and the builder is offering 4%, you can take it. You just have to amend that the buyer's representation agreement. Okay, so that may feel weird, but we are entering into a world, and I want you to understand this, where everyone is going to know what we're getting paid. The other broker, the other agent, and the buyer and the seller. So let's just get it out there. So if a builder's offering you 4%, you're entitled to that 4%, right? You just have to amend the original buyer's rep agreement. Now, you may elect to give back a portion of that to your buyer if you kind of feel weird about it. Because let's face it, there's not a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to new construction as much as there is with a pre-owned home. So if you feel bad about taking that extra percent or a bonus, whatever it is, maybe you give a portion of that to the buyer in exchange for them signing the amendment. Now, I have heard that all the big underwriters are not counting that compensation towards the buyer's debt to income ratio and anything financially related to the loan. All right, so just keep that in mind. Next question, what if a seller will pay 2%, but my fee's 3%, and buyers has to come up with the other 1%? Well, that is going to be memorialized in 2 documents. One is going to say the seller is going to pay you, the buyer's agent, 2%, and then your agreement with the buyer, the buyer's rep, already says that whatever the seller doesn't pay, you're making up for. All right. And then I account for that on the CDA. So there's no extra documentation that splits out seller pays this, buyer pays this. Our agreement is only between us and the buyer. So that is accomplished through the CDA. Now, in today's world, what happens? If under BAC in the MLS it says 2%, we pretty much just say we're taking 2%, right? So if that's still the case and you forfeit that extra 1%, you'll still need to amend the buyer's rep, which is probably what we should have been doing already, to reflect 2%, knowing that we're going to get that from the seller. Okay, so as you can kind of see, everything has to have a paper trail to it. Will the MLS have a field for buyer concession? Probably not. Do I need to do a representation agreement in an open house? There's good news and bad news here. Hear me. All 30 of you on the call, hear me when I tell you. Yes. If you are hosting an open house for a listing that is not with White Rock Realty, If it is a listing on behalf of another one of our agents and you're not the listing agent, you don't have to have people sign it. But if you go do an open house for a Keller Williams agent, you have to do one. So before you implode, let me kind of tell you how that's going to look. There's a short form, one pager buyer rep agreement where there's a box, and I'm going to review this, that says showing services only. And you can put 0 in there, and you're going to have one, though, for everyone that comes in. So do we now print flyers for open houses? Yes. Do we now print a stack of comps for open houses? Yes. Will we have to print a stack of short form buyer reps? Yes. If we're doing an open house for another brokerage. But here's the deal. Do the best you can. You're not asking for their email. You're just asking them to fill in their first name, last name, and sign it. That's it. You're going to check the box that says showing services only, 0. Some are going to sign it, some are not. I'm not asking you to be the National Guard here. If they don't want to sign it, don't force them. But that's what we have to do. So that's just FYI. Okay, so here are the new mandatory forms. So just to sweat this down, these are going to be brand new to y'all. You've never seen these before. The other forms we're going to review, but they're just changes. So the new mandatory form is temporary, and this is TXR 2701, an amendment to representation. This is going to apply to whether you represent the seller or the buyer. There's only one document. There's not a separate document that's going to be for a listing and a separate one for a buyer. It's just one. And it's temporary because if you have any agreements now, be it a listing agreement or a buyer's rep, that is going to bleed over that August 17th date, we need to be in compliance contractually because they would have signed old documents. Okay. Now, the new ones are in there now. So they're not signing any old ones now, right? But if you have some carryover from I think it was June 24th that we got all these new forms, and whatever it is, whatever agreement you have doesn't close by August 17th, you're going to need to use this. And we're going to review this in a second. This is not to be confused with the amendment that already exists to the listing agreement and the separate amendment that exists to the buyer's rep. We're going to review both of those because I was confused last time. All right, but this is just a one pager. The next new one is TXR 2406, and it's called Addendum Regarding Brokers' Fees. This is really at the heart of the lawsuit, which is no one knew who was paying what who, especially the buyers and sellers. And it was then implied that there was no choice. Well, now it's in front of God and everybody. So this one document does nothing more than disclose who's paying commission and how much. Do you remember in the 1-to-4 family residential contract at the very bottom of page 10, where we had to fill in a line there and it said what we're getting paid, and we put in 3% or whatever the listing said? Well, you know, that wasn't binding, right? That was in the spirit of disclosure as well. So that's what this one document replaces. So the difference is that it's only signed by the buyer and seller. In contrast to the next mandatory form, which is TXR 2402, compensation agreement between brokers. This is signed by brokers only, meaning you. So the listing agent signs and the buyer's agent signs. This is what the title company is going to require to pay you. Unless we have this form, no one knows who to pay what. Because remember, in Texas, you can't pay an agent directly. It's got to come from the broker. So hence the agreement between brokers. So broker A on the listing side agrees to pay broker B on the buyer side this amount. And that's the only way the title company is going to be able to match that up with the CDA in terms of who pays what. So the buyer and seller do not sign this. It's just for brokers. Okay. A buyer's rep is now required. So long form and short form options exist. We're going to go through all that. I talked about this. Forms are TXR, Trek does contracts. The word commission in any of these documents has been replaced by the word compensation. Not sure why, but there you go. All right, so any questions on that before I launch into the contracts? Isn't this fun? I'm stoked. So let's go over hang on. Now, there we go. Let's go over the listing agreement. So here's what I elected to do today, y'all. We are no longer looking at marked up contracts because they don't exist. So this is not the version where it's redlined and blued in. I just think that it's too confusing. And we are kind of at the next level of understanding these contracts. So I figured if you were to have a listing appointment tomorrow, you're going to be looking at this exact version. So let's use this one. Okay. So not much has changed in the first little bit. You can kind of see these are templates now that I downloaded. So you can see where I have preloaded in my brokerage name, address, all that. And there's really, you get to the kind of changes when you come to paragraph 5. In the fork in the road, the decision to make, y'all, is just one of two things. Is the seller going to pay a buyer's agent or are they not? And what I got wrong the last time is how you fill in box 5A1. This is inclusive of the entire compensation. And so because 5A is where you would pay the other broker, it's going to include what you're going to pay the other broker, right? So remember in the old listing agreement, you had to go down like 5 other pages to get to that other compensation. Well, it's all in one spot. So let's say that the seller is going to pay the other agent. It would be 6% total here if that's the fee that you elect to charge, or some other fee. You could do that. You could do a flat fee. I've mentioned that before. Don't be afraid to do that. And then 5A2 says, okay, well, from this amount, how much am I paying the other broker? End of story. Okay. Can this change? You betcha. Why would this ever change? Let's say the home was priced at $400,000 and the seller was 45 days into the listing and he's becoming desperate and you get an offer for 325 and he decides to take it. And in order to save money, he has changed his mind and is not going to pay that other co-op agent 3%. Is he entitled to do that? 100%. How? There's an amendment to the listing agreement whereby you change that. Okay. So remember, and you're going to get these sellers that are going to do this when, and naturally that this would happen in that exact example. Christy says, I want to go see 123 Main Street. Okay, awesome. Seller's going to pay a 3% commission. Christy's got a new home buyer that can't afford to pay her commission and they're on a budget and they're only qualified for 350 and the house is at 400,000. The agent's already told Christy it's 3%. Until Christy gets something signed in the offer process as to what she's going to get paid, it's just lip service. Because Christy's client is so strapped for cash that the client decides to put in an offer of 340 because they want some wiggle room, and the seller actually accepts it. But on one condition, Christy ain't getting 3%. Christy's going to get 2%. So the listing agent then has to amend this document, and then Christy needs to send in an accurate compensation agreement between brokers and an addendum regarding brokers' fees that says Christy's getting 2%, not the 3% that she was verbally told. And so in my example, the seller's not trying to be a jerk, but there are going to be conditions around how much they're going to pay. Okay, so that's option 1. Option 2, whoops, is 5B, I'm not paying anything. Okay, so my 3% here is just reflective of I'm going to pay the listing agent. Okay, seller will pay broker's us if we're representing the listing. Okay, so this can't be filled in if A is filled in. So it's either A or B. Okay. The other significant change, and let me just go down, comes in paragraph 11. There's nothing else that's changed here, y'all. Nothing. Except when you get to paragraph 11. So in the listing agreement, if you're taking notes, write down paragraph 5 and paragraph 11. Let's go to paragraph 11. Broker's authority. Whoops. (11A), broker will use reasonable efforts to act diligently to market the property, yada, yada, yada. Paragraph 11D, all this above that's not changed. Advertise the property by means and methods as broker determines. D2, place a for sale sign on the property. 3, furnish comps. D4, disseminate information about the property to other brokers and to prospective buyers, including offers of compensation that didn't exist before. So the minute they sign this listing agreement, they give us permission to tell Christy, in my example, she's getting 3%. And that should have been memorialized in paragraph 5. Okay? The other thing that's changed in paragraph 11 is 11F, that says the seller does or does not authorize the broker to communicate with the other side that the seller may consider contributing some amount towards the buyer's concessions. All right, and then in big bold letters it says, doesn't mean I'm gonna. It just says I may consider it. Doesn't mean I'm gonna. How do you know he's gonna? Send him an offer. Put in paragraph 12. If you know that the seller is, man, shoot for the moon. If your seller wants 5, ask for 10. Or buyer wants 5, ask for 10. Let's see where it goes. At least you know the door's open. Okay? That is literally it for this document. That's literally it. So paragraph 5 and paragraph 11. Okay? Any questions on the listing agreement? So in addition to all the other conversations and caveats about the document, the two things you're going to have to add is you're going to pay the buyer's agent commission, because we're going to become real good friends, because it's going to sit here a long time if you don't. And number 2, are you willing to pony up some money to the buyer's agent for closing costs that, oh, by the way, can possibly go to the buyer's agent's commission? Those are the biggies. Any questions? Clear as mud? Okay. Stop me if there is. All right. Here is where you would change anything on the listing. Let me just make sure I have the right one. Yes. Yes. So this always existed. Just want to make sure I got that right. So this always existed. You know, when you have a listing and it's listed at 400,000 and it's not moving, and the seller says we need to lower the price to 380, this is what you use to do that. Same thing, except the fees come into play. So remember, this is just between you and the seller. So if you are changing any configuration about what we just went through on paying the other broker, this is where you do it. So even if they want to blow this whole thing up and say, I've changed my mind, I'm not paying anybody anything, or I'll pay you 3, but I'm not paying the other broker more than 2. Or based on this offer I just got, I'm not paying the other broker 3, I'm paying him 1. This is where you would change that. Now, it also says, here's where I had to really, really look. Because you know how a general amendment to a contract will reference specific lines in the contract, and it'll say paragraph this, paragraph that. I really had to look hard to make sure that they weren't referencing that here. These are just item letters, right? This doesn't mean paragraph E, paragraph D, paragraph. I'm looking, where are they talking about? It's just an ordering thing on this one amendment. And so now let's say that you want to augment something on the listing agreement that's not covered here and items A through E. Well, that's where you choose paragraph F. Or I'm sorry, item F, where it says paragraph whatever changes as follows, and you write whatever you want in there. Okay, so this is just changing the configuration of the listing itself. Okay, so this already existed. Now, not to be confused, let's look at the temporary listing agreement, which is only applicable if your seller signed an old form. So this would be pre-June 24th, and their listing didn't sell after August 17th. You need to do this one pager instead of redoing the entire listing agreement. You're more than welcome to do that if you want, but you don't have to, because this just memorializes the compensation disclosure, which means that everything's negotiable, all that good stuff. Okay, I'm going to send out reminders on August 1st to anybody that has a listing. But if you do, please mark in your calendar August 17th, just for grins, just in case. Okay, the last agreement, the last contract or form for sellers. I would include this in your listing documents to sell. So what are the usual suspects that you would bring to a listing appointment to have signed? Listing agreement, seller's disclosure, T47, that's be notarized, but you get the drift. And this one, seller's authorization to disclose and advertise certain information. Now this form always existed, but this more specifically calls out in paragraph A, yeah, man, in writing, I'm committing to entertaining the idea of contributing some amount to a buyer for their expenses. Now, just to prove that this existed before, go to paragraph B, and it says seller authorizes broker at broker's discretion to disclose and advertise the following information. This would be stuff like, I'm getting a divorce. It's okay to communicate that. I got a job relocation. It's okay to communicate that. If you want to put in the listing, motivated seller, you can do that. But that is usually a no-no. Okay, so you need to get permission to say those things, and that existed before. But in addition to that, they put right up top, yeah, I as the seller agree to at least entertain contributing something. But then it goes down to saying big bold letters, seller is not obligated to pay the amount or any amount. Okay, when do they become obligated? When they sign the stack of contracts, because it'll be in there. Okay, so include this in your listing presentations. And so that's it for the listing side. Are we good on the listing side? All right. Buyer's representation agreement. There are 2 versions. One is the long form, which is just a fancy way of saying this is the old form, but with changes. And then there's a short form, which I'll go into in a second. All right, so this is going to be all about compensation. And here we go. Term starts and ends on a certain date. Nothing's changed until you get down to paragraph 7. It says, there's a lot of bold here. So remember what I've said before. In any of these agreements, if it's in bold or underlined, the association or TREC thinks it's a really big deal. So it says broker compensation or the sharing of compensation between brokers is not set by law nor fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by the Association of Realtors, MLS, or any listing service. Broker compensation is fully negotiable. Brokers independently determine their fees. Brokers are prohibited from receiving compensation from brokerage services from any other source that exceeds the amount stated in the agreement, and that's a biggie. All right, so here, this is your price. This is what you charge for your services. Okay, I'm sorry that it is a percentage of a really large number, Mr. Client, but that's how we're paid. Because you know what? It may be 3 months before I see this money again. So I've earned it. And I'm going to prove to you why in practice, but here's a list of stuff that I'm going to do for you. And again, that's on our website. So this not necessarily has changed a whole lot in the sense that you put here what you're charging. Leases, it's another thing that hasn't changed. And funny enough, neither has the source of compensation. Broker will seek to obtain payment of the fees specified in paragraph 7A first from the seller. Wow. All that litigation, and we're still going after the seller, you betcha. Landlord or their agents. If such persons refuses or fails to pay the broker the amount specified, client's going to pay. Okay, so the best offense is a defense, or isn't that the other way around? Best defense is an offense, whatever. You can tell I'm not a sports guy. Here's my point. The best way to not feel weird about this, before they put their pen to paper, tell them that this is now fully enforceable. You've got to pay, and this is my price. But oh, by the way, 9 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 houses we're going to go see, the seller is going to pay, most likely. But let's just see how it goes. So tell me, A, are you able to do that? B, if not, do you want to talk through kind of alternatives? Because we can do that. And one of those is you could ask for something from the seller anyway. Or if the seller only pays X amount, I'll agree to take that amount. Or the lender might be able to help you. Or you can roll that into the price. So just off the top of my head, being a wise guy, I just came up with 4. So there's no reason that y'all should feel apprehensive or guilty about getting this signed. Okay? So this hasn't changed. None of this has changed. If you're doing new construction for somebody and they want you to, worry about hooking up utilities, you can put that here. Anything that you want to charge a buyer, you can. When gas prices were high, I saw agents charging buyers a certain amount of money just to cover their gas fee. One example. Protection period, that hasn't changed. The intermediary concept, that hasn't changed. Right? So it's really just about that one paragraph. Okay? And then you as the broker's associate are free to sign that. All right, so little has changed except for paragraph 7. So if you're taking notes and you want to know, okay, well, I know he said something about the buyer's rep long form. What was it? Just go to paragraph 7. That's where it is. But it comes with more than that, right? You got to have the conversation. You can't just rush off to go see a house and hope that these details are going to work out, because they won't. Okay, so let's take a look at the short form. All right. So before we get into this, I would get to the long form as quickly as possible. The only reason the short form exists is because the settlement mandated that before anybody sees a home, you got to have a written agreement. Well, what if I met that person in an open house and I got their contact information and I reached out to them on Monday and they want to go see a home, and the only rapport I've ever built with them was the 30 seconds I took to get their information? Well, in the spirit of easing into that relationship, you might do this if you sense that the relationship might not go anywhere, or if you sense that they're only using you to get into a home because their agent can't get get in right away. That's common. You can do this. And it covers a lot of what's in the long form, but it leaves a spot for in paragraph 5. So if you're taking notes on the short form and you need to go back and refresh your memory, it's paragraph 5. Because this says, I'm going to do one of two things as a buyer's agent. I'm either going to provide full service, which why wouldn't you just do the long form? Or for a certain fee, I'm going to show you a bunch of houses, but that's it. I'm not going to give you advice. I'm not going to hook you up with a lender. I'm not going to create that typical agency relationship that would be formed with the longer version of this document, right? You are literally in Uber for opening up doors, and that's it. That is where, and I'm telling you this because we tend to overhelp and overshare, but that is where your obligation has to end because it doesn't allow for anything beyond that. So what if they want to see one home in one day? Well, you would put whatever fee you're charging for that. And in paragraph 3, maybe you put the address of that home, or maybe just to cover yourself, you put the city or the county. You just don't want to put something so specific that you paint yourself into a corner. So what if they want to say, see 10 homes? Well, you put a fee in for that. So if you've written an agreement for, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on the number of homes. All right. In fact, I wouldn't do that. I would say my hourly rate is $100 an hour. If we can see 10 homes in an hour, let's go for it. Now, the hiccup is that this has to be paid to the brokerage, right? So it can't be paid directly to you for all the reasons that existed before. The client can't pay an agent directly, right? So that's why it gets very cumbersome. Okay, so if you're like me and you want to take the path of least resistance, you don't want to get, and you don't want to get into any of that, then just do the long form. But be aware that if you do the short form and you enter into this environment where you're charging people for showings, there needs to be a way to pay me. Okay, so whether they give you a check, it has to be made out to White Rock Realty or whatever, or I'll send them an invoice, whatever. But there's a chance they're not going to pay. All right, so just FYI. If you chose full service, you would go down and fill in paragraph 7, just like you would on the representation agreement, the full version, right? But I would get to the long form as quickly as possible. This would be used if you didn't think it was going to really go anywhere, but you wanted some extra money. Why not? Let's go show these folks some houses. Maybe so. So let's ask this. What if you use the short form and things actually progress and y'all are getting along and they want you to put in an offer? Because that goes way beyond showing services. You got to fill in, you got to go into the long form is the answer. Okay, so use this to show the home, but if it progresses into, oh, I want to put in an offer, you've got to have them sign a long form. So if you were the buyer, how inconvenienced would you be when you were asked to sign all these documents that pretty much said the same thing? And how long would that have to go on before the client just says, I'm not dealing with this person? Wouldn't take long. So that's why I say get to the long form as quickly as possible. Any questions on this? Let's go to Lisa's. Question?
Yeah, I have a question, Brad.
Yep.
So I'm not sure that it's clear to me, so I'm gonna have to figure this out. So when you say, you're gonna show homes for a client, for somebody that's, just showing homes, when you say add your fee, is there a recommended fee? Is there a guidelines on that, or we just make it up? How you said like $100 an hour, or we kind of just So there's no guidelines for that, specific guidelines?
Yeah, I'll throw out a guideline if there, because there are some services out there that you can do this with, right? Xiaomi, and there was another one that popped up a couple of years ago. And I think it was 25 bucks a showing, right? So the price that you think is appropriate for the time it's going to take to get there and the gas you're going to spend.
Mhm. Okay,
So I would start at 25 bucks and just go up from there.
okay. So now we can't just, somebody just wants, is looking at houses, they're not sure that we use this short form so we can get some compensation for our services that we did provide at the time, right?
Well said. That's exactly the purpose.
Okay.
Because you have no idea if they're going to write a contract or not. And it's really only for people that haven't turned into a full-blown client yet. You're just trying to build rapport because we've all been there. We've all, the neighbor approaches you. Yeah, I really want to go see this home. Wait a second. We haven't even talked about what you want yet. So this allows you to do that, but get compensated for it, which I think is a good thing. Anything else? The short form? Okay. Okay, so this is one of the mandatory forms. Addendum regarding broker's fees. This is the full disclosure document that is signed by, as you can see here, the buyer and seller. So there are no more secrets as to what we're being paid. And we, the buyer agent, are responsible for creating this document. Just so there's no confusion, the seller does not do this, the buyer does. So paragraph D is where you're going to put how much you're getting paid. Okay, that's it. You just fill in the box. Okay, but this when you turn in, so let's just talk through this. Buyer wants to go see 123 Main Street. Christy calls up agent Jim that represents the seller of 123 Main Street. Jim tells Christy, I'm going to pay you 3%. You take Josie to go see 123 Main Street. Josie loves it. Josie wants to write an offer. What would you all have done before the settlement? You would have filled out the 1 to 4. Josie's getting a loan, so you're going to fill out the third-party financing addendum. The seller was nice enough to put in the seller's disclosure, so Josie's going to sign the seller's disclosure. And it wasn't built before 78, and it's not in an HOA, so that's all you're going to do. That's pre-lawsuit. Now, you're going to do all those forms plus this one. You're going to submit that, and your buyer is going to sign it. Probably the biggest point. Your buyer is going to sign this as part of the offer. And just like any other document that I just mentioned, the seller hasn't signed anything. And so if they agree to everything, they're going to sign it here. All right. So that goes hand in hand with the next document that you're also going to submit at offer time. This is only signed by us. Listing broker and co-op broker. That's us. And it says the exact same thing. So remember, it doesn't matter if the buyer sees this or not. They just signed the exact same document. So why does other document exist? Again, because it has to be disclosed for God and everybody to know who's paying what whom. Well, how are you going to enforce that? This document. Okay, this is what title is going to go to say Christy's going to get paid whatever amount is in this document. Okay, so the seller signed it first on that other one, and now the broker is going to come in, and just for good measure, they're going to sign another document that hopefully will say the same thing. Now listen, once this is signed, that's it. There is no renegotiation. So the seller can change their mind 6 ways to Sunday, just like they could before the contracts are executed. Once that date is slapped onto the back end of that 1 to 4, and all these have been signed, that's it. There is no going back. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. So that's why it's submitted at the time that it's submitted. Okay. This is the amendment to the buyer tenant representation agreement, not to be confused with one that I'll review in 2 seconds, which is the temporary version, which I've already reviewed. This falls under the heading of, what if a builder is offering more than was in the original buyer's rep agreement? So let's say the buyer's rep says 3%, and let's say a builder's offering 4. Heck, let's say that the listing agent has verbally told you before you went to go see the home, my seller gave me permission to tell you that he is hyper motivated, and we're not only offering 3%, we're going to give you a $5,000 bonus. That happens. This is where you would amend it. Okay, because it says broker's fees, paragraph C, D, and E, and it even says bonuses and other compensation. Okay, so remember, it already said one thing in the original long form buyer's rep. You're just coming in and saying, well, we're changing that, and this is what it's going to change to. So let's say, in a bad example, the buyer's rep originally said 3%, but the seller's only going to give you 2%, and you're okay with that. You're not going to let the seller or the buyer pony up the other 1%. You're going to have to do this document and say, put 2% in here. It can't be verbal. Think of, I'm in front of a judge. How are you going to prove that the buyer wasn't still on the hook for 1%? Well, it's right here. It's right here. Okay. And oh, by the way, the seller was nice enough, he's going to pony up an extra $5,000. That's where this goes. Or builder going to pay an extra %. That's where that would go. Okay. This has always existed, but without the language about compensation. Okay. And then I just went over this a minute ago. The same goes for a buyer representation agreement. If they filled out a form pre-June 25th and they haven't found a home by August 17th, and it's now August 18th or beyond, you have to get this signed. Okay. It's the same document we just went over. It applies to both buyer and seller. And man, that was it. So those are all the documents. Let me make sure that I answer all of these questions. Yeah, so let me just go back real quick. Short form.
Well,
Yeah,
I've got a question too when you're ready.
Yeah, go for it, Joyce.
Going all the way back to the very beginning. Sorry about that. When we were in the White Rock back office, and you said to go to the video tab, and then there was the clean list of all the documents. What is that called? What's it labeled in your documents?
Yeah, let me show you. So if you want a clean list of all these new forms, go to how-to videos.
Okay.
And this 4th one down, which is normally what you would do if you first joined, and I say set up all of your zip form templates so that you know what contracts go for a buyer and what go for a seller. That's what this is. And then this document right here called template docs will give you every possible form and contract you would need for a listing, for a
Okay.
buyer,
Mm-hmm.
for a lease, whoops, and a condo.
Okay.
Okay, so, and I even went back and made sure that the numbers haven't changed, because they have on some of these contracts, so they all should be right.
Mm-hmm.
But you can kind of see in here, I added, let me blow this up. Short form, long form,
Yeah. Okay.
you know. Now, a lot
Uh-huh.
of people ask me, because there's a lot here,
Yeah.
well, I need every form for every transaction. No, but you're going to need all of them at some point for one of them. So that's why I say just put them all in there, use what you want, don't what you don't want, whatever. But all of your contract templates should match up with this.
Okay. And then my last question is, on all of these where it's listing out specifically the broker's fee, and we've got it populated currently, pre-populated with 6%. So is that really for both sides of the people, or is it, am I missing the part of where it breaks down of who gets 3 and who gets 6?
Yeah, so the best way to think about that is that the only contract or document that does it that way is the listing agreement, which has always been the case.
Okay, right.
The listing agreement in paragraph 5 is, and it even says this paragraph includes payment of compensation to the other person. So
That includes that. Okay,
this
okay.
is 6%. And then
Mm-hmm.
it says, okay, well, from this amount, this is what I'm paying the other buyer agent. Every other spot where it refers to compensation is only your individual compensation, not the 6%.
Get it. Okay, okay. All right, that's where I was hung up on that. I was missing that. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. So two last things. One is that, remember, you have an agreement, be it with a listing client or a buyer client, with regards to how much you're going to get paid. So if, for example, the listing agent is only going to pay you 2%, but your fee is 3%, it should be no surprise when they see that on the final closing disclosure, the buyer, that they have to kick in 1%, if you so choose to enforce that. I'm just trying to fill in the blanks on, well, how is all this going to get enforced? Well, the CDA, what I send out, the commission invoice, right? So because the other side is sending out a version of their commission invoice that should match up to their paperwork. So if the buyer does happen to be on the hook for part of your commission, that's going to be disclosed on the closing disclosure, right? All those dozens and dozens of lines, and here it's just going to be an additional amount of money that they have to bring to the closing table. So they shouldn't be surprised. But the title company is going to look for the compensation between brokers to at least understand what the selling agent with the listing agent is going to pay you. The other part comes from you when you do the CDA for me to approve, and you're just going to say, well, the listing agent's going to pay this, but the 2% is going to come from the seller, but this other part is going to come from the buyer. And that happens today. I fill out plenty of these things where an agent, that exact scenario has happened. This listing agent's only give them X, and they worked out another amount with their buyer, and the buyer is going to kick in. So there is an option to do that. The last point I want to reinforce is the short form as it relates to open houses. So I sure would hate to see our ability to do open houses for other brokerages go away. I would just be prepared because of a lack of understanding about what has to happen legally, that you may get pushback. And because it's intimidating, I can see brokers just saying, we're not doing that anymore. We're not letting other agents do open houses. Okay, so just be prepared. But there will be most probably, that understand what it is that needs to be done. You could get in front of this and say, believe me, I know based on the NAR lawsuit, what form I have to have available to all of the attendees, and I have that prepared. So because in our 8-week coaching program, this was a to-do for this coming week. Go set up an appointment for an open house. Well, what if this is past August 17th? How does that look? You're going to bring a stack of comps. You're going to bring a stack of flyers, just like you normally would, and you'll bring a stack of this form. And you're going to ask them to fill in. You're going to fill in here, White Rock Realty, and you're going to ask them, and maybe you highlight this in yellow to just make the process go quickly, and just say you have to write your name here, and you're going to already click here, showing services, put 0, which I've already validated you can do, and then just have them sign. And you sign, right? So have all this pre-populated, and then just have them sign and put it in yellow, highlight it, just say sign here, sign here. This is a requirement by the Texas Real Estate Commission. You can say it like that. It's not, but really it's because of the NAR lawsuit, but that's going to invite controversy, right? So just tell them this is a requirement by the Real Estate Commission. Sign here and here. Some are going to say, okay, or some are going to scribble in something. Some are going to sign here. You're not going to be able to read it. It doesn't matter. Some are going to say, I'm out of here. I'm not signing this. That's okay. Some will say, I'm going to look around, but I'm not signing anything. Okay. This is Texas, man. They might have a 6-shooter in their waist. You dig? I don't want that trouble. So don't press it. Just do the best you can. I will worry about the rest. Okay? Open houses are just such a great mechanism for business. I want to do it right. All right. So hopefully that was a better session than last time. I feel it was a bit more organized. Any questions before we wrap up? Well, hopefully I entertained you at the very least. Okay. Well, when the rubber meets the road and you actually have to fill these out, I know you're going to be like a deer in headlights. So don't worry, y'all. I got your back. I got you. Just
I liked your joke in the beginning.
That's it?
I liked it.
All right, I got one more for you as we go. I got one more for you. You know, a real estate agent, the client told me, yeah, a real estate agent sold me a 2-story home. One story before I bought it and another story after. An oldie but a goodie. An oldie but a
Good
goodie.
one.
All right, y'all. I'm here if you need me. God bless, Godspeed. If you're from Houston, I hope you have power. We all love you out there in Houston. All right, y'all have a good rest of the week. Take care.